So today we're making a vegan choux sponge, especially formulated for making Swiss rolls. So today I'm going to demonstrate how to make both a plain and also a chocolate variety, so you can use them in all your different types of Swiss rolls. So why is it called a choux sponge? Well, this sponge cake, we're actually going to be cooking a portion of the flour, and the reason that we do that is we want to start activating the starches to give more elasticity to the dough. So this is going to allow our batter, our sponge roll, to have more stretch, so when we are rolling it into our sponge roll, we have less chance of it cracking. So let's get cracking on making this choux sponge. Now, as always, we want to make sure that we mise en place all of our ingredients. I have everything all ready to go. Now, the first part of this recipe for both the plain and the chocolate is exactly the same. So we're going to get started. We are going to be making what is known as a water roux. So all we need to do is combine our water with the starches that we'll be using. So one of the unique starches we are using is tapioca starch. Now, if you've ever used tapioca starch, I know it's quite common in the plant-based kitchen. We often use it to make things like stretchy cheeses that you get that pull. So it's going to do a similar thing here. It's going to create some stretch for our dough. And I've just added it to my water measurement. Along with that, we have a portion of all-purpose flour. And I'm just going to whisk that all together. We just want to make sure that it's incorporated. And my water is cold, so we want to make sure that it's cold water. And we're just starting to dissolve that flour and starch. Now I've got a little saucepan over here. We're going to transfer that mixture into the saucepan. And over a low to medium heat, we're going to continuously stir until it starts coming together and getting nice and thick. By making this water roux, it's actually going to also, in addition to that elasticity when rolling, it's actually going to keep our sponge softer, moist, and fluffy for longer, which means we can prepare this ahead of time. We can make lots of our little rolls and they're going to stay nice and fresh and taste delicious for longer time. So the texture, it's going to start looking like a pudding, and we want to continuously stir until all of that comes together. All right, so all of that's come together and you can see that it's quite stretchy and elastic, so that's perfect. So I'm just going to set that aside for a moment, and we can get started preparing the wet component of our sponge cake. So in my jug here, I have some coconut milk, and this is the variety that you would get in a can. And to that, we're going to be adding some white granulated sugar, along with some vinegar or any type of acid. You could use lemon juice if you want. We have a small amount of salt, and some neutral flavored vegetable oil for our fat component. So I'm using sunflower oil today, or you can use grapeseed oil, whatever you prefer. Now, using an immersion blender, we're going to blend everything together. Now we're going to add our water roux, which we prepared. It's very sticky. All right, and give it a good blend. We want this mixture to be nice and smooth. Now with your dry ingredients, we have in our bowl here some all-purpose flour. So this is our second measurement of all-purpose flour. And to that, we have our baking powder. Now, when I make my plain sponge cakes, I always opt to just use baking powder as opposed to a combination of baking powder and bicarb soda. And there's a reason for that. I do find that with my vanilla cakes, if I do add bicarb soda, you get a much more yellow cake, a much darker cake. And for these Little Debbie's style sponge rolls, I really like to keep it as white or as pale as possible, just so it looks like the original. And I also have a small amount of xanthan gum. Now this is optional for the recipe, but I do find it gives a little bit of additional strength to our sponge roll. I'm just going to mix those ingredients together and just sift onto some parchment paper. Now we just want to pop that back into our bowl and then just strain our liquid component into our flour or dry mixture, just to make sure that there's no lumps. Now we want to fold everything together until it's just combined. We don't want to overwork the dough, otherwise we're going to get a tough sponge cake. Just fold until you can't see any dry flour anymore. Don't worry if you've still got some lumps. So mine's still a little bit lumpy, but that's fine. We're going to go in with a whisk and just do a few more folds with our whisk. All right, I'm happy with that. Now I've just got myself a large tray here and I've got a silicone mat which I've put on top. Now I do have a preference of using the silicone mats because I find that they won't wrinkle in my oven, and because this sponge cake is very thin, I find that's really important so we don't have any very, very thin parts of our sponge. So just pop that over your tray. I'm going to put all of our batter. And using a small offset spatula, we're going to smooth it out, leaving about a centimetre or about half an inch around the edges. Once you've got it roughly smoothed out, you can go in there with a larger offset spatula if you like. You find it a bit easier just to get it nice and level. Now for our chocolate sponge, I've already prepared our liquid component. So that was where we made our wateroo, exactly the same as the plain sponge. And now for our dry ingredients, we've replaced approximately about 20% of our total flour weight with cocoa powder to give it the chocolate flavor. And in addition to that, we're going to be adding our leavening agents. So for the chocolate sponge, I'm using a combination of both baking powder and bicarb soda. I'm not worried about this cake becoming more brown or darker color because we have the cocoa powder. And doing the combination of the two leavening agents just gives it a little bit more leavening power. And we also have a very small amount of xanthan gum as well going in there too, just to help again with the strength or the elasticity of the dough. So my sponge has come out of the oven and I've allowed it to cool for about 15-20 minutes on the tray. Now we're going to flip it over. So I've just got myself some baking paper. I'm just going to pop that over the top. Now I like to just cover it with a tea towel, just to make sure that it's not going to dry out or anything. So I just like to cover it with a tea towel. We're going to let this cool down for another maybe like 15-20 minutes before we cut this up and put our cream inside.